to another Friday edition of Primility Primer, our morning reminder of the power of balancing pride and humility as we go about our daily lives. This is episode number 49. I am your host, Jared Morris. And I want to tell you a story that happened yesterday. It was perfect timing for yesterday because it was certainly an example of primility out in the wild, which is what we try to use our Fridays for here. Try and take examples of primility out there in articles in the real world and bring them to you here as stories to illustrate what the concept means, how it actually applies in real life. So yesterday, as Heather and I were finishing up our workday here in our home office, she came in from a call that she was on, and she had a look of relief on her face and in her voice, and she explained to me that I guess I should explain to you. Heather does financial consulting, and so she does some pretty complicated, complex stuff for companies that are looking to have IPOs, basically. And there was a particular type of memo that she had been tasked to write, and the subject matter of that memo was a little bit outside of her area of expertise and understanding. It's not something that she is typically doing. And it had been weighing on her some because, I mean, look, Heather's going to give you 110% when she when she does work. It's what I love about her, even if it's impossible for us to give 110%, obviously. And she's stubborn like that in the best of ways. But the relief came from explaining to the other people that she's working with that this isn't really her area of understanding. Didn't want to just go down the road, not say anything, deliver a memo that was just going to get torn up, wouldn't provide the value that it was supposed to provide. And it all worked out okay because other people understand this, they're going to help out, and it's going to be fine. And so Heather, raising her hand, admitting, hey, I may not be the best person to do this part of this. Yeah, on the one hand, you can say, well, that kind of shows weakness. That shows that that you don't understand something that you're supposed to do. But I think that's a very myopic way to look at it, because in the end, it does the greater good for the greatest number of people. Because instead of Heather just kind of arrogantly in many ways saying, you know what, I can just do this, I'll just figure it out, or not wanting to admit that she can't, just to not have that awkward conversation, it would have gotten worse later, both for her and obviously for the company. So it was really beneficial. That moment of humility on her part was very beneficial. And what was really interesting is literally 5 minutes later, after we had finished our conversation, I was going through my inbox and I got my latest issue of the Farnham Street email newsletter, which is a terrific email newsletter if you don't get it. If you go to farnhamstreetblog.com, you can sign up for their email newsletter. It is always just filled with really, really interesting links and articles and ideas. And this particular issue of the newsletter had a post called "The Two Types of Knowledge" in it. And so I want to read a little bit from this. This is by Shane Parrish. She starts out the article saying, "In the Art of Thinking Clearly," and this is a book by Rolf Dobelli, he tells this story about Max Planck. Okay, and I'm reading this verbatim. After receiving the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918, Max Planck went on tour across Germany. Wherever he was invited, he delivered the same lecture on new quantum mechanics. Over time, his chauffeur grew to know it by heart. "It has to be boring giving the same speech each time, Professor Planck. How about I do it for you in Munich?" This is the chauffeur talking. "You can sit in the front row and wear my chauffeur's cap. That'd give us both a bit of variety." Planck liked the idea. So that evening, the driver held a long lecture on quantum mechanics in front of a distinguished audience. Later, a physics professor stood up with a question. The driver recoiled. "Never would I have thought that someone from such an advanced city as Munich would ask such a simple question. My chauffeur will answer it." And he goes on to talk about how this story is often used to, it's not about the cleverness of the chauffeur, right? His quick-wittedness and being able to have that great answer and then turn it over to Max Planck, his quote-unquote chauffeur. But it's more about these two different types of knowledge, right? So on the one hand, we've got the type of knowledge from, the people who have really sweated it out. They've done the work. They've been there in the trenches. They really understand whatever it is that they're doing. And then on the other hand, you've got people who are more echoing or parroting what they've heard. And in a lot of ways, if they've soaked up enough of that kind of surface level knowledge, they can talk about it, they can say it, they can give a presentation, they can look really good, but they don't really have the knowledge, right? And the one example in here is, if you want to find out if someone has Planck knowledge or chauffeur knowledge, ask them why. Right. And that will really help differentiate the two, because as we saw with the chauffeur, just a simple question, and he's got to turn it right back over to Max Planck because he doesn't know how to answer it. He just knows how to give this presentation that he's seen over and over again. Now, here's the really interesting part about this, and this is where it ties together with the story that I just told you about Heather. So this is going back to the Farnham Street article, and it's kind of Dobelli's conclusion on this after telling the story about the two types of knowledge. Be on the lookout for chauffeur knowledge. Do not confuse the company spokesman, the ringmaster, the newscaster, the schmoozer, the verbiage vendor, or the cliche generator with those who possess true knowledge. How do you recognize the difference? There is a clear indicator. True experts recognize the limits of what they know and what they don't know. If they find themselves outside their circle of competence, they keep quiet or simply say, I don't know. This they utter unapologetically, even with a certain pride. From chauffeurs, we hear every line except this. And isn't there a certain irony there that the chauffeurs, the ones who don't really have the deep understanding, they tend to be the ones who will still try and pretend and try and fake it, right? And what is that? That's nothing but pride turning into arrogance, thinking only of yourself, only of your own image, and you just try and keep it going, trying to keep the appearance up. But the Plancks, the people who really understand, the people who really know, are okay stepping back and say, you know what, I don't know this. Maybe you can teach me. Or I don't know this. Maybe someone else should do this. With that certain sense of pride, right? I love that line, because basically what he's saying there is having pride in your humility. Thinking that maybe someone else knows it better than you, thinking of other people so that you don't try and give an answer that isn't going to be good, that they will then use, and it may set them back in whatever project they're working on. And that's what made what happened with Heather such a perfect example of primility in the wild, because she had that certain sense of pride in her humility. And I know it wasn't easy for her, but certainly once the outcome happened, she was very happy, very relieved that is the path that she took, and it was the right path, because Heather has Planck knowledge, right? She really understands what she's doing. She's great at her job, and she understands the parts that she doesn't understand, and knows that it would be much better to bring someone else in, obviously learn from that person so that she'll have more of an understanding of what it is later on. But just a great illustration, I thought, of that sweet spot, right? But between that balance of pride and humility, where, having that certain sense of pride when you really do understand, when you really do have the real knowledge, knowing that it's okay to say, I don't know, that it's even preferable to say, I don't know, because it's going to be better for everybody, including yourself, in the long run. So that is this week's example of Primility in the Wild. And that concludes another week of Primility Primer episodes. We'll be back on Monday with episode number 50. I can't believe we're already at 50 episodes already, but that is incredible. And it's due in large part to all of the support that you all provide with your emails, with your downloads, with your listens, with everything. And so I really, really appreciate it. If you're not on the email list yet, go to primility.com/join. Every Friday, we send out a Friday digest that lists the 5 episodes from the previous week with the headlines and the descriptions. I know it's hard to keep up with a daily show, so if you can't keep up every day, get that Friday digest. Then you can look back, see which episodes have titles and descriptions that are interesting to you, and get yourself caught up. That's the purpose of that. And then on Monday, you'll get our Monday morning email to get your week started off with a positive thought. Thank you all for being here. We'll be back on Monday with another episode. Until then, stay cognizant of your pride and humility. Wrist bump.